The evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the family home. Ava, the 31-year-old older sister, sat on the porch, her thoughts restless. Her younger brother, Noah, had just returned after being away for several years. Now 22, he had grown into a self-assured young man, taller and more muscular than she remembered. They had always shared a close bond, but now there was a subtle shift between them, an unspoken tension that lingered. She couldn't stop thinking about how much he had changed, how he had matured. When he stepped out of his car, the way he carried himself and the look in his eyes sent a thrill through her that she couldn't quite understand. Noah made his way up the steps and sat down beside her. The air between them felt heavy, laden with unexpressed thoughts. They exchanged casual conversation, but beneath the surface was a charged energy that neither could ignore. "I didn't realize how much I missed this place until I came back," Noah said, his voice low, his gaze lingering on Ava a moment too long. Ava's heart quickened. "It wasn't the same without you," she responded softly, her eyes meeting his. They sat together in a silence that felt anything but empty. It was filled with an intensity that made Ava's pulse quicken, especially as Noah's leg brushed hers, sending a shiver down her spine. That night, the house felt unusually quiet. Their parents were away for the weekend, leaving just the two of them alone. Ava lay in her bed, her thoughts racing. She couldn't get Noah's earlier gaze out of her mind, nor the tension that seemed to hum between them. Her thoughts were interrupted by a gentle knock on her door. "Ava, are you awake?" Noah's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Yeah, come in," she answered, her heart pounding in her chest. Noah stepped inside, his tall figure filling the doorway. He hesitated briefly before sitting on the edge of her bed, a vulnerable look in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "I couldn't sleep," he confessed, his voice so quiet it was almost lost in the silence. "I keep thinking about us, about how different things feel between us." Ava's breath hitched. She felt the same way, though she hadn't dared to admit it to herself. Before she could reply, Noah's hand reached out, brushing against hers, and the touch sent a surge of longing through her. Without thinking, she leaned forward, her lips lightly meeting his. The kiss began gently, hesitant, but quickly deepened as the barriers between them crumbled. Noah's hands moved to her waist, drawing her closer as their mouths pressed together with a hunger they could no longer deny. Ava's fingers threaded through his hair, pulling him down towards her as they kissed deeply, releasing years of pent-up tension. Noah's hands roamed across her body, his touch both tender and insistent. Ava responded instinctively, her skin warming under his caress, every touch igniting a new spark. Noah paused briefly, pulling back to gaze into her eyes. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered, his voice thick with need. Ava nodded, her breathing quick and unsteady. "I've never been more sure," she replied softly, pulling him in for another kiss. Noah's hand slipped beneath her shirt, fingers tracing the curves of her waist as he moved upward. Ava let out a quiet moan, arching her back in response to his touch, the fire within her growing hotter. She drew him closer, their bodies pressing together as their kisses grew more urgent. Noah's hands found the hem of her shirt, slowly lifting it over her head to reveal her bare skin. He paused, taking in the sight of her before leaning down to kiss her neck, trailing his lips down to her collarbone. Ava gasped, her fingers gripping his shoulders as the sensations overwhelmed her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, his breath warm against her skin as he kissed lower. Noah's hands explored every inch of her body with a desperate curiosity, as though he couldn't get enough. Ava's hands wandered over his back, pulling him closer, craving more of his touch. Their movements synchronized naturally, each touch and kiss drawing them closer together. Noah's hands slid down her sides, slipping beneath the waistband of her shorts, his fingers brushing her skin. Ava let out a soft moan, her body trembling with anticipation as he continued to explore, making her head spin with each touch. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the house. Ava, 31, sat on the porch, her thoughts restless. Her younger brother, Noah, had returned home after several years away. At 22, he had become a confident young man, taller and more muscular than she remembered. They had always been close, but now, an unspoken tension hung between them. Ava couldn't help but notice how much he'd changed, how he'd matured. The way he moved and the look in his eyes as he got out of his car sent a thrill through her that she couldn't quite explain. Noah climbed the steps and sat beside her. The air was heavy with an unexpressed energy that neither of them could ignore. They made small talk, but beneath their words, an electric charge pulsed between them. I didn't realize how much I missed this place until I came back, Noah said, his voice low, his gaze lingering on Ava a beat too long. Ava's heart quickened. It wasn't the same without you, she replied softly, meeting his gaze. Silence settled over them, but it was far from empty. It buzzed with a tension that made Ava's pulse race, especially when Noah's leg brushed hers, sending a shiver through her. That night, the house felt unusually still. With their parents away for the weekend, only Ava and Noah were left. Ava lay in bed, thoughts swirling in her mind. She couldn't shake the way Noah had looked at her, or the unspoken tension between them. Her thoughts were interrupted by a gentle knock on her door. "Ava, are you awake?" Noah's voice came through, barely more than a murmur. "Yeah, come in," she answered, heart pounding. Noah entered, his tall frame filling the doorway. He hesitated, then walked over to sit on the edge of her bed, a vulnerability in his eyes she hadn't seen before. "I couldn't sleep," he confessed softly. "I keep thinking about us, about how different things feel." Ava's breath caught. She felt the same but hadn't dared to say it. Before she could respond, Noah's hand brushed hers, sending a jolt of desire through her. Without thinking, she leaned in, her lips grazing his in a tentative kiss. It started gently but soon deepened as all the barriers between them crumbled. Noah's hands slid to her waist, pulling her closer as their lips met with a hunger they could no longer deny. Ava's fingers tangled in his hair, drawing him closer as they kissed deeply, releasing years of pent-up feelings. Noah's hands explored her body, a mix of tenderness and urgency in his touch. Ava responded instinctively, her skin warming under his hands, every caress sparking something within her. He pulled back slightly, meeting her eyes. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice thick with need. Ava nodded, her breathing unsteady. "I've never been more sure," she whispered, pulling him back into a kiss. Noah's hand slipped beneath her shirt, tracing the lines of her body as he moved upward. Ava moaned softly, arching her back, the fire inside her burning brighter. She pressed herself closer, their bodies fitting together as their kisses grew more fervent. Noah's hands found the edge of her shirt, lifting it over her head to reveal her bare skin. He paused, taking in the sight of her before kissing her neck, trailing warmth down to her collarbone. Ava gasped, fingers digging into his shoulders, the sensation overwhelming. She felt the heat of his body, his breath warm against her skin as he kissed lower. Noah's hands moved over her with a desperate curiosity, as if trying to memorize every part of her. Ava's hands wandered across his back, pulling him closer, wanting more. Their movements were perfectly in sync, each touch and kiss drawing them closer. Noah's hands slid down her sides, slipping beneath her shorts, his fingers brushing her skin. Ava let out a soft moan, her body trembling with anticipation as he continued his exploration, each touch making her head spin. The tension between them intensified until it was unbearable. Their lips met again in a fiery kiss, bodies pressed tightly as their connection reached its peak, as if they had been waiting for this moment forever. Now that it was happening, there was no turning back. As the night wore on, they lay entwined, breaths mingling in the quiet room. Words felt unnecessary, the bond between them was too profound to be captured by mere language. In the morning light, everything felt different. The weight of their actions hung in the air, yet there was no regret, just a quiet understanding between them. A bond that had always existed, waiting for the right moment to surface. Noah traced patterns on Ava's shoulder, his voice barely audible. "I don't know what comes next," he admitted with uncertainty. Ava smiled gently, her heart full. "We'll figure it out together," she reassured him. As they lay wrapped in each other's arms, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it as one. The first rays of morning filtered through the curtains, casting a gentle glow over the room. Ava shifted beneath the covers, savoring Noah's warmth beside her. The weight of their choices lingered, but it felt comforting rather than burdensome. There was no shame, only the closeness they had found, deepening their unspoken connection. Noah stirred, his hands slipping around her waist, pulling her closer. Ava's breath hitched at the feel of his skin against hers, sparking memories of the previous night. She turned to meet his eyes, and for a moment, neither spoke. They simply looked at each other, the silence thick with a newfound intimacy. "I don't want this to end," Noah murmured, tracing gentle circles on her arm. Ava smiled, brushing her fingers against his cheek. "It doesn't have to," she whispered, her voice steady. She kissed him, softly this time, with a promise that what they had begun wouldn't be fleeting. Their lips moved gently, exploring each other, as their hands began to wander once more. Ava's heart raced as Noah's hand moved up her back, fingers tangling in her hair. She pressed closer, her body responding to his touch with a need she couldn't deny. Their connection grew deeper as the morning sun climbed, leaving them in their own private world. Eventually, Ava rested her head against Noah's chest, tracing idle patterns on his skin. "What do we do now?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. Noah was silent for a moment, his hand stroking her hair. "I'm not sure," he finally replied, "but I know I don't want to lose you." Ava met his gaze, eyes filled with emotion. "You won't," she assured him. "We'll figure it out together." They shared a lingering kiss, full of unspoken promises and possibilities. Though the weight of their situation lingered, there was a calm in knowing they were in this together. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, but neither wished to return to what had been. That afternoon they stepped outside together. The world seemed different, brighter, more vivid. They exchanged secretive glances, smiles hinting at the corners of their mouths as they walked through their familiar neighborhood. The closeness they shared was palpable, but they kept it hidden, their bond strengthening with every passing moment. In the days that followed, they found more stolen moments, quiet touches when no one was looking, lingering glances when they thought they were alone. It was a thrilling, yet nerve-wracking secret, but they were cautious, ensuring no one suspected the truth of what had unfolded between them. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Ava leaned her head on Noah's shoulder. "You know we can't keep this a secret forever," she murmured, her fingers tracing his arm. "I know," Noah replied, his voice heavy with the reality they faced. "But right now, all I want is to be with you." They shared another tender kiss, the intensity of their emotions overwhelming them. As they parted, Noah cupped her face, looking deeply into her eyes. "I love you," he said, his voice sincere. Ava's heart skipped a beat, tears welling in her eyes. She hadn't expected to hear those words, but now that she did, she knew she felt the same. "I love you too," she whispered, kissing him softly. The future was uncertain, but they had discovered something rare and precious in each other, something they couldn't easily let go. And no matter what lay ahead, they were determined to face it together. Their relationship, unconventional as it was, became a new reality. The bond they shared grew stronger with each passing day, and though challenges surely awaited, they were ready to navigate them hand in hand. For now, they had each other, and that was all they needed. The rest of the world could wait.